she was just a retired art historian running an antique shop until she found Nazi-era gold certificates hidden behind an 18th-century painting brought in by a customer. Her 25 years of academic experience told her one thing: this wasn't just an antique, this was a trail to the lost Nazi treasure. And now, she was the only witness to an 80-year-old secret. But before we dive into this incredible story, if you're new here, welcome to The Last Witness. We share the most amazing untold stories of ordinary people with extraordinary secrets, stories where someone becomes the final witness to incredible events. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. And if you enjoy this story, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps us continue bringing you these incredible tales. Now, let's get back to Eleanor's story. Eleanor Hartwell had been running Hartwell Antiques in Greenwich Village for 12 years, building a reputation as one of New York's most knowledgeable dealers in European art and artifacts. At 58, with silver hair and reading glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck, Eleanor looked exactly like what she was, a retired academic who had found a second career, combining her expertise with her passion for historical objects. What distinguished Eleanor from other antique dealers wasn't just her scholarly background, but her specialized knowledge of art history's darker chapters. During her 25-year career as a professor at Columbia University, Eleanor had become one of the world's leading experts on Nazi art theft and the systematic looting of European cultural treasures during World War II. Eleanor's academic career had focused on tracking stolen artworks and documenting the complex web of theft, forgery, and black market sales that had characterized the Nazi regime's approach to cultural property. She'd spent decades researching archives, interviewing survivors, and working with law enforcement agencies to identify and recover stolen masterpieces. Eleanor's expertise had made her valuable to museums, insurance companies, and law enforcement agencies around the world. She'd testified in numerous court cases involving disputed ownership of artworks, consulted on restitution claims by Holocaust survivors' families, and helped recover millions of dollars worth of stolen cultural artifacts. But Eleanor's academic career had also exposed her to the frustrating reality that thousands of stolen artworks remained missing, hidden in private collections, or lost in the chaos of post-war Europe. Despite decades of investigation and recovery efforts, the vast majority of Nazi-looted art had never been found. Eleanor's transition from academia to antique dealing had been motivated partly by her desire to continue her recovery work outside the constraints of university bureaucracy. As a private dealer, Eleanor could pursue leads and investigate suspicious artworks without the institutional limitations that had sometimes frustrated her academic research. Eleanor approached antique dealing with the same methodical research skills that had characterized her academic career. Every piece that entered her shop was thoroughly documented, researched, and verified. Eleanor maintained extensive databases of stolen art, consulted with international law enforcement agencies, and refused to handle any item that couldn't be conclusively documented as legitimately owned. Eleanor's scholarly approach to antique dealing had earned her the respect of collectors and institutions who valued authenticity and provenance verification, but it had also made her known to people who had inherited or discovered artworks with questionable backgrounds and needed expert evaluation. That reputation led to a phone call on a Tuesday morning in October 2023 that would change Eleanor's understanding of her own field of expertise. The caller identified himself as Thomas Weber, an elderly man whose German accent suggested that English wasn't his first language. Weber explained that he had inherited several items from his late father and needed expert evaluation to determine their authenticity and value. Professor Hartwell, Weber said, "I understand you specialize in European art from the wartime period. I have some pieces that may be of interest to collectors, but I need someone with your expertise to examine them properly." Eleanor arranged to meet Weber at her shop the following afternoon. She was intrigued by the possibility of evaluating wartime-era pieces, especially given Weber's apparent German background, and the likelihood that his father's collection might include items with complex provenance histories. Weber arrived at Hartwell Antiques, carrying a wooden crate that appeared to be quite old. He was in his 70s, well-dressed but nervous, and spoke with the careful precision of someone who had learned English as a second language later in life. "These items belong to my father," Weber explained as he began unpacking the crate. "He died 6 months ago, and I'm trying to understand what he left behind." The first item Weber unpacked was an 18th-century oil painting depicting a pastoral landscape. The painting was small but beautifully executed, with the kind of detailed brushwork that suggested it was the work of a skilled artist from the Dutch Golden Age tradition. Eleanor examined the painting carefully, noting the canvas quality, paint composition, and artistic techniques. Her initial assessment was that the piece was authentic and potentially quite valuable, though she would need to conduct more detailed research to identify the specific artist and establish a complete provenance. "This is a beautiful piece," Eleanor told Weber. "Do you know anything about how your father acquired it?" Weber hesitated before answering. My father lived through the war in Germany. He rarely spoke about that time, but I believe he acquired several artworks during the 1940s. I'm not entirely certain about the circumstances. Eleanor felt a familiar alert that she'd developed during her academic career. Weber's carefully worded response suggested that he suspected his father's wartime art acquisitions might have involved questionable circumstances, but he wasn't prepared to admit that directly. Mr. Weber, Eleanor said gently, I need to be direct with you. My specialty is identifying artworks that were stolen or acquired illegally during World War II. If your father's collection includes such items, we need to handle this situation very carefully. Weber nodded slowly. I've been wondering about that. My father was secretive about his past. I've found some documents among his papers that suggest he was involved in activities during the war that he never discussed with the family. Eleanor asked Weber to tell her everything he knew about his father's wartime activities and art collecting. What she learned was deeply concerning. Thomas Weber's father, Klaus Weber, had been a mid-level administrator in the Nazi Cultural Ministry during the 19th. Klaus Weber had immigrated to the United States in 1947, settling in New York under a displaced persons program that was later discovered to have been used by numerous Nazi officials to escape prosecution for war crimes. He'd lived quietly in Brooklyn for over 70 years, never discussing his wartime activities and maintaining no contact with other German immigrants. Professor Hartwell, Thomas Weber said quietly, I believe my father may have stolen these artworks during the war. I want to do the right thing, but I don't know how to proceed. Eleanor appreciated Weber's honesty and apparent desire to address his father's legacy responsibly, but she also knew that handling Nazi-looted art required careful coordination with law enforcement agencies and international restitution organizations. Eleanor began her examination of the 18th century painting, using techniques she'd developed during her academic career to identify evidence of theft, forgery, or improper acquisition. The painting's frame was original to the period, but Eleanor noticed that the canvas had been relined relatively recently, possibly within the past 30 years. More concerning, the painting showed evidence of hasty removal from its original location. Small tears near the edges suggested that it had been cut from a larger frame or mounting system. Eleanor also found several small holes in the canvas that appeared to have been made by nails or tacks, indicating that the painting had been temporarily mounted or displayed in multiple locations over time. This pattern was consistent with artworks that had been stolen and moved frequently to avoid detection, but Eleanor's most significant discovery came when she began examining the frame more closely. Hidden behind the backing paper of the frame, Eleanor found a small envelope containing several documents. The documents were in German and appeared to be official Nazi paperwork from the 19th. Eleanor's German was sufficient to understand that the documents were transfer certificates for cultural property confiscated from Jewish families in occupied France. The certificates included detailed descriptions of artworks, their estimated values, and the names and addresses of their original owners. One of the certificates specifically described the 18th century landscape painting that Weber had brought to her shop, listing its original owner as Dr. Sarah Goldstein, a Jewish art collector from Paris, whose collection had been seized in. They were part of a larger inventory system that documented the location of a massive collection of stolen art and other valuables that had been hidden by Nazi officials near the end of the war. The certificates included references to a storage facility in the Bavarian Alps, where Klaus Weber and other Nazi Cultural Ministry officials had hidden hundreds of stolen artworks, along with gold bars, jewelry, and other confiscated valuables worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Eleanor realized she was looking at a map to one of the largest undiscovered Nazi treasure hoards in history. Eleanor faced a complex decision about how to proceed. The documents provided clear evidence that Weber's father had been involved in major war crimes, but they also offered the possibility of recovering stolen artworks and returning them to the families of their rightful owners. Eleanor decided to contact the FBI's art crime team, which specialized in investigating stolen cultural property and coordinating international recovery efforts. Special Agent David Martinez met with Eleanor and Thomas Weber at the antique shop the following day. Agent Martinez had extensive experience with Nazi art theft cases and immediately recognized the significance of Eleanor's discovery. Professor Hartwell, Agent Martinez said after examining the documents, "What you found is potentially one of the most important discoveries related to Nazi art theft in decades. These certificates could lead to the recovery of hundreds of stolen artworks that have been missing for 80 years. Agent Martinez explained that the FBI would need to coordinate with German authorities, international law enforcement agencies, and Holocaust restitution organizations to properly investigate the storage facility mentioned in Klaus Weber's documents. Thomas Weber agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation and to surrender any other materials related to his father's wartime activities. Despite the painful revelations about his father's past, Weber expressed relief that the stolen artworks might finally be returned to their rightful owners or their families. The investigation that followed led to one of the most significant
significant Nazi art recovery operations in recent history. Using the location information from Klaus Weber's certificates, international investigators discovered a hidden facility in the Bavarian Alps containing over 300 stolen artworks, along with gold bars and jewelry worth an estimated $400 million. The recovered artworks included paintings by major European masters, sculptures, rare books, and religious artifacts that had been stolen from Jewish families, museums, and cultural institutions across occupied Europe. Many of the pieces had been given up for lost, and were found to be in remarkably good condition despite having been hidden for 80 years. Eleanor worked with international restitution organizations to identify the original owners of the recovered artworks and coordinate their return to surviving family members. The process was complex and emotionally charged, involving families who had never expected to see their stolen heritage again. One of the most meaningful reunions involved the 18th century landscape painting that had started Eleanor's investigation. Eleanor was able to locate Dr. Sarah Goldstein's granddaughter, who was living in Montreal and had become an art teacher despite never knowing about her grandmother's extensive collection. Professor Hartwell, the granddaughter, said during the painting's return ceremony, "My grandmother never talked about what she lost during the war. Seeing this painting helps me understand a part of her life that she kept hidden from us." Agent Martinez called Eleanor after the conclusion of the investigation to thank her for her contribution. "Professor Hartwell, your expertise and decision to contact authorities led to the recovery of cultural treasures that might have remained hidden forever. You've helped return pieces of stolen heritage to families who thought they were lost forever." Eleanor continued operating Hartwell Antiques, but she also began working more extensively with law enforcement agencies and restitution organizations to identify and recover stolen cultural property. Her experience with the Weber case had demonstrated the ongoing importance of expert evaluation in uncovering the hidden legacy of wartime art theft. Eleanor also established a foundation to support research into Nazi art theft and to assist families seeking to recover stolen cultural property. Her academic expertise, combined with her practical experience as an antique dealer, made her uniquely qualified to help bridge the gap between scholarly research and practical recovery efforts. On quiet evenings in her shop, surrounded by the carefully documented antiques and artworks that represented centuries of human creativity, Eleanor often reflected on the responsibility that came with expertise in cultural heritage. The Nazi art theft had represented one of history's most systematic attempts to destroy cultural identity and erase the heritage of targeted communities. Eleanor's work in recovering stolen artworks was more than just academic research or commercial activity. It was a form of historical justice that helped restore dignity to victims and their families. Eleanor had learned that the most important discoveries often came not from formal investigations or official searches, but from ordinary people who inherited mysteries and chose to seek the truth rather than ignore difficult histories. The last witness to her academic career had become the first link in a chain of recovery that returned stolen heritage to families who had waited 80 years for justice. It wasn't the retirement career Eleanor had planned, but it was the service that history needed her to provide, and that, she'd learned, was more than enough purpose for any scholar, whether working in university archives or examining antiques in a Greenwich Village shop.
Thank you for listening to this incredible story here on The Last Witness. If you enjoyed Eleanor's journey from art history professor to antique dealer to Nazi treasure hunter, and want to hear more amazing tales of ordinary people who become the final witnesses to extraordinary events, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you these untold stories that deserve to be heard. What did you think about Eleanor's decision to investigate the suspicious painting despite the potential complications? Do you believe people have moral obligations to address historical injustices even when it's personally difficult? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts on these stories, and remember, sometimes the most important historical discoveries happen not in archives or museums, but in the everyday places where people choose to seek truth rather than ignore difficult pasts. Until next time, keep listening and keep witnessing the truth.